Let me start again. So welcome everybody to today's BAInsights. Today, I'm really pleased to have two excellent guests talking about a really important topic for business analysts, and that is developer collaboration, which is something that as BAs we tend to do quite often. As I said, we've got two expert BAs to join us on this conversation, and I'd be really pleased to hear their view. Before I move into introductions and the session itself, if any of you out there have got a view that you want to share through the comments, please do. Of course, like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'm looking forward to an interesting topic. Okay, so Razelle, would you mind introducing yourself as well, please?
Hi, thanks, John, and great to be here. So I'm Razelle Naidoo. I'm from Cape Town, South Africa, and I've been working for almost 14 years now as an IT business analyst in the financial services industry. So from risk to investments, to Forex, to online banking. And I just think, BAs are meant to be some of the best collaborators you have in any context, in any situation. That's one of our master skills, really.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Jodie.
Hi, I'm Jodie Huss. I've been working in the BA world for way too long. Based out of the Midwestern US, and been working most recently in communications and managed IT areas. I'm an application development manager. I lead a team of both developers and business analysts. We're actually a joint team, which is unique, I think, in some of the situations that we've been in. We have this both in-house and offshore. So we have a little different aspect in some of our communication. But at the end of the day, as a result of we have to be the expert communicators. And it is a unique field, and working with the developers to me is fun. And we try to make it fun, which is it's good for all of us.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and we shouldn't miss out on the point that it's an enjoyable activity to collaborate with developers. Some of the most interesting, enjoyable projects I've been on have been working side by side with developers who are a really good bunch, I should add. So maybe let's start then, Razelle, with a point in terms of what does effective collaboration look like when it comes to business analysts and developers?
Interesting question. So for me, I think it would be fewer misunderstandings if I could put it into a few words. When you've reached the point when you two are on the same page and you're talking the same language, and that's not because we all speak in English here, but we could be talking over each other or not even understanding what any of each other is saying. But when you're the dev and you find that you are actually on the same page, you both understand what you're saying, then I think you've reached the point of effective collaboration. But to add even more to that, it's when you've really got the developer engaged in the requirement. When you've got them actually looking at it, understanding it, applying themselves, then you've reached the ultimate point of effective collaboration. And, just some of the ways you could achieve this, I think, and what's worked for me is having these weekly focus sessions. You get an hour, for example, and you only focus on this one particular task, like user interface enhancements. In that 1 hour, we only talk about that. We delve into the scripts of it. We delve into the code of it. The dev and you understand each other. You make updates in that 1 hour. And then for the rest of the week, maybe you work on the other stuff. But every week for that 1 hour, you have these focus sessions. I've noticed they really worked for me in building collaborative work that brings out value. And if you're asking these clarifying questions, then you are helping to eradicate those misunderstandings that you sometimes have. And what else has worked for me is to just develop that empathy with the developers, to really put yourself in their shoes, to understand how they think, how they understand things, so you can better communicate with them. So just to recap, for me, it's have these focus sessions for effective engagement, ask the clarifying questions, and communicate effectively to reduce misunderstandings by using empathy.
Brilliant. What a good start. Thank you, Razelle. Jodie?
I like the idea of your weekly focus and staying on something for just a defined period of time, so everybody has a chance to digest, as we call it. We're having conversations in areas that the developers don't necessarily live in every day, whereas the analysts have been in that world. And so sometimes we start conversations and you think everybody knows where you're talking. Our company is notorious for acronyms. And the first thing we do is stop using acronyms. And so we can explain what we're talking about in words and not the acronyms. And it gives people time to understand it. They're not spending their time looking up what we're talking about. And so having that focus and we try not to rush. We give people time to take a look at something, digest it, come back to it. So they don't feel like they're being rushed, and they can come back with questions after they've looked and researched a little bit, because otherwise it's the tension of, I'm asking a question, I should know, but they don't. And so we make them feel comfortable enough that they can come back and ask any question. And then asking their opinions has really come a long way within our teams, is making sure we ask the developers their opinions of things, because it really does matter. It's not only what the business needs and how we translate it. They need to be able to feel welcome at the table and to be able to give their opinions as to what they see. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the biggest things we did to achieve this is we integrated the BA team and the development team into the same team. They work together side by side. They train each other. They ask questions. We're all remote, but it really helps to build the camaraderie between the teams. And that in itself helps collaboration, because you know the people. And it's not another team that's coming in or the BAs coming in, because they're actually part of your team.
Yeah,
that's really worked effectively for us. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. It's quite nice in that situation that they're formally part of the same team. I mean, most of us probably work in project teams or temporary teams where developers and BAs are very much part of that temporary structure. But I guess once the project's over or they're not focused on that, ordinarily they might go back to completely different functions within the organisation. And as you say, having them together means that there's even more reason to collaborate and work together as well.
And it's amazing what the BAs can learn by living in the development world, because you kind of get an area into their expertise. And if a BA wants to learn more, the developers will take time and show that. And there's the curiosity in both directions. That has been helpful.
That's right. Yeah. And I like the point of you said as well about just speaking to developers, understanding what they need, treating them like a stakeholder. I know you didn't use exactly those words, but that to me is really, really key for this continuous collaboration between the developer and the BA. Quite often I will, as a BA, speak to the development team or the development leads before I speak to the business, because I want to know, what challenges they might have witnessed in the past, what type of questions they might really need me to answer as well, and to find out anything else I can that will be useful insight around past experience, the project, the team, so I can go in as best I can when I'm speaking to the business stakeholders and ask the most appropriate questions, so I can get the most important information back to the development team as well. I think and I think you also made that point around building that ability, so the development team, they'll come to you if they've got questions as well. Being open, is really, really key, isn't it? Because a lot of that collaboration, you can't necessarily plan exactly when it's going to be needed, but if a developer is sitting there with a question or there's something they need clarification on, they need to be able to know they can pick the phone up, they can get on the call, or they can walk over to the business analyst and they'll get the answers they need, or at least get the help that they need.
And it's interesting that when you get in that kind of environment, you don't the developers value the BAs in a manner that they want to call and ask them. It's not, they don't wonder what the BAs do or what they bring. And it's kind of, it's both on both sides of that. They know who to call and they know what they can do. So it's, from the development side, it works really good too.
Just thinking on that point, Jodie, I mean, in your experience, what's the most value that BAs can bring during the development cycle or the development phase of delivery?
I think a lot of the value that our BAs, especially here, they bring is that we have BAs from different business facets. Very few of the BAs truly went to school to be a BA. You came in here because you were born a BA and you just happened to be in different jobs along the way, and all of a sudden you landed on our team, and it's like, hey, that's really not what you're a BA. And so we have people from all different areas of education. And the value that that can bring is it's just the bigger picture value. We connect, some came from a finance background, so they truly can incorporate into the finance teams. Some we're an IT company, so we have the IT areas or procurement, and we've got BAs from all different areas. I have BAs that have the soft skills that came from journalism, and so we've got BAs from all different backgrounds, and it just brings a huge variety. And then with that variety and with the tenure of the BAs typically on our team is that we bring a level of business vision that not every team has and not every stakeholder even has within our teams. So we're connected at different projects at a strategy level and have awareness of adjacent projects. And so we can bring in different vision on what's being requested for the business and sometimes even connect the business holders together and the stakeholders in a way that other teams within our organization aren't in a position to do. We find that super valuable, especially when we get several projects moving at one time, and we prevent a lot of bumping into each other with that kind of information because we've seen it before it happened. And it keeps the projects going well. It keeps the stakeholders updated. And I think that's one of the biggest things is that level of knowledge and level of vision.
Yeah, that definitely resonates, Jodie, because I think in my experience as well, the BA tends to be in so many different conversations with different perspectives, different members of business, IT and architecture, etc. So they're perfectly placed to identify if there's any information that would be beneficial to share with others, and to identify if there's questions that there's no answers being given to, and much more, of course. But yeah, I really like that point that you made. Razelle.
Yeah, I think Jodie made some very good points. BAs, unlike other professions, tend to be very much diversified in experience and qualifications and then personalities also. And so that's what they bring to the table. And I think my experience with devs is that what BAs can really offer them and in the whole process is that playing that person who can get them to really engage, because Jodie mentioned their opinions matter. They have valuable insights, and that's where the BAs can really play a valuable role in that whole process, getting them to engage with the requirement by explaining the why, by giving them the context, by helping them see it from the customer view, from helping them see it from the end user view, BAs can play such a valuable role there, obviously. And I just love that idea about having devs and BAs in a team that really integrates them and break down that whole silo thinking and gets them to really work together as a team towards achieving something rather than you need to do your part and you give it to me and I do my part. But that whole thinking of having them in one team just brings them together nicely to say we're working towards a common goal. And that in itself is great collaboration for me.
It makes me think of a project I was on once where we were all fortunate to be located in the same office, same floor, and actually around a relatively close set of desks. So therefore, if the developers were working on a function, a feature, and they had a question, they would literally just stand up, put their hand up, and just say, "Right, I need help on this," and at least one BA would head with them into the room, but generally it tends to be a few developers. Those BAs that had something to say on that topic, the architect might join them as well. Maybe the tester would come along to listen in, and it's a good opportunity then to get all the questions out there and to bounce ideas off each other, and as a BA to figure out things that you can't answer because you actually haven't got the information to hand, but therefore that you can go away and get an answer quickly. So they're all really important, and I guess from my experience, even though we're not always fortunate enough to be co-located and sitting next to each other throughout, if we can try and replicate that same sort of mentality, even though we're working remotely, then I think there's absolutely no issue with the team being remote. You won't really see much difference in that sense. We should be able to put our hand up and say, I need help. I need to get a BA or BAs together. Let's come and have a talk about this and figure it out.
And that's totally a good point. that you make, John, that we need to be intentional about doing that in our day-to-day activities, especially in the hybrid world that we're living in now. And if you're working with someone, a developer that sits maybe on another continent in a different time zone, you need to be very intentional about creating these opportunities with them where you can just say, could you be a thinking partner for me? What do you think about this?
Yeah,
I
that's
do
so
like-
true, Razelle. Yes, we have 2 teams and we are 10 and a half hours apart. So we're very intentional on when people are open, and we free time from other projects during the overlap time so that people can just reach out and do a quick message and they don't feel like they're interrupting because this is your time. And it works really well. And the other thing we've done, John, because I haven't had the privilege of actually working in the same building as any of my developers in a very, very long time, but we're video on. So everybody sees we're all remote based, and we don't worry so much about what's happening in the background because we all have a life, and that's part of the camera on, is that you get to know people like you would around the water cooler.
That's it.
And so we're very intentional about the cameras on, and I don't have to worry about scrubbing my background because if one of my analysts flies through the window, it's okay. We try to make it feel comfortable for everybody.
Yeah, that's a really key point I think you raised there about, when it is a virtual call, to be present and have your camera on and to show that you're present and you're actively engaged. Because certainly, there's no way to tell, is there really, when your camera isn't working and isn't showing the person. Right. You just don't know whether they're engaged or not. And there's always that sort of reluctance probably to be too forthcoming and engaged and try and collaborate if you're really not sure the person you're collaborating with is actually there. But I do like the point as well that was made by Razelle about really being intentional. And I think, I think BAs, we should try and be proactive in that sense, be intentional and reach out to developers regularly, let them have give them the comfort that they can come to us with questions at any point, but also, make sure we can go to them as well to make sure that they have that opportunity if they wasn't aware of it. I wonder when it comes to requirements, and I'll ask you this first, Razelle, how do you ensure your requirements are clear enough so that the developers don't necessarily waste their time guessing what the requirement, what the intention might be?
I guess this has been a journey for me, quite a learning process. So there are a few things a BA could do and should do initially. You learn to articulate well, try and be as clear as you can. And I often use Copilot as a good peer reviewer, a good thinking partner. You're an expert developer. Does this make sense to you? Is anything inconsistent? Are there questions you'd like to ask me? And Copilot has been very good in helping me improve the quality of my requirements. So that's definitely one thing you could try. And most BAs should, I would think, are doing it this time. But another thing to keep in mind is those feedback loops. The more you collaborate, the more you communicate and talk to your developers, you'll start to learn the things that cause the misunderstandings. You'll start to learn how to better communicate. Maybe this in a picture form would more appropriately communicate what I'm saying. Maybe if I do it in more code type languages. For example, I use a less than or greater than sign that effectively communicates the logic I want to be built, because you know how they speak and how they think. So you have to be open to this feedback loop continuously as you are working with them. Adapt, amend, change. You learn along the way. So it's never you at the perfect place at the start, but continuously improving.
Yeah, and that point about adapting is really key, isn't it? Because no developer's the same, no BA is entirely the same either. So really need to adapt to their needs, their experience, what they're being asked to do, and the situation, of course, might change at any given point. So I really like that point you made, Razelle. Jodie, how do you ensure requirements are clear enough for your developers?
I love the way you rephrase that, and on the adaptive. And if you think about it, you meet people where they are, because even within our dev teams, they're not at the same place. And I may be moving between different teams that might be at a different level within the features they're working on. And you always have to figure out, who are you working with? Where are they at? What do they know about our business? Because we have contractors too. And we meet them where they're at. So it's important for the BAs to always I love that you're using Copilot. It's one of my favorites. But we're always learning, and we have to be open to our own feedback loops too, as to how did that go? How did that conversation go? What did I miss? Did I come in too high, too low? Were they? And how can I get my own feedbacks every single day? Is a personal feedback loop. And if you take those with your requirements, you can get them clearer. You can figure out what pictures work best, because it is very easy to do mock-ups now. They used to take a lot of time, whereas you can simply put a Copilot transcript through and get a mock-up. And so that picture is worth 1,000 words. Some people are very literal. They can see the words. Some people need pictures. Some people, if you can do just a little bit of this is how we do it today, a little show, a little current state. Everybody learns a little differently. And the more you can incorporate all three of those into a single planning session or a single requirement session, they'll all take a little bit different away.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think developers as well, they definitely would appreciate some context before they get just a ranch of or a tranche of requirements dumped upon them. It's definitely in their interest to understand the business, what the vision is for the product or for the business before they get to work on it. Understand some context, as well, wider context perhaps around the process, different actors that might be involved in it, to really set that scene, paint that picture, as you said. And that might be verbally or it might be illustrated, however really it lands best with developers, which going back to the point you made before, just adapt to what they need and their needs as a team. So I think that for me is one on definite approach. I think therefore speaking ahead of going and gathering the requirements, as I mentioned, is really key. But also as you deliver and document the requirements, take some time to talk the development team through each requirement and specifically what the intention is behind it, and use that as an opportunity as well to elicit questions from the developers and refine, of course, the requirement if you find out from those sessions that actually you didn't quite define it as well as you could have, and it could have been worded slightly better. But yeah, I definitely like the point you also made about the mock-ups and illustrations, because a picture is often much better and easier to understand. And sort of understand as well, I think one other thing I tend to do is on the basis that sometimes the topics we're working on can be quite complicated from a business sense. There's normally an opportunity to find an example that we can all understand. So it may not be the precise example that we're ultimately build, but having a view of like a similar approach, a similar mentality, a similar type of ask that they might be familiar with will help us sort of think about the type of functionality that is needed.
Oh, very true. Yes.
Mm.
I wondered, Jodie, what's the biggest misconception you think that that developers have about business analysts, and do you have a view of how that can be overcome?
Every new developer that comes in, we go through this because a BA is different depending on where you've been. If you go online, go online and look at the job descriptions or the position descriptions or the stuff coming through LinkedIn. You can't define a BA. So when a developer comes in and says, "Hey, we have a BA for the team," it's like, what do they do? Because depending on where they were before, they could be a statistical person, they could be a project manager, they could be a product owner. And so sitting down with the team and going through a little bit as to how we work, what we do things in the past, we get through the BAs don't just schedule calls. That they actually they provide value. They're not note takers. Some of the simple stuff, and to be able to come in and have a conversation with the development team, and they can understand where your technical expertise is and where theirs is, and how the gaps can be filled between the two. Because sometimes that's a misconception about BAs, is that they're not technical, but that really depends on the role that person's playing.
Yeah.
Some of our BAs are super technical, and honestly, some of them aren't, because that's not their role in the organization. And they could be technical in finance, but not technical in coding. So their expertise and their technical is very different. So it's always trying to set the expectations really early so that we don't get the assumptions going into the first couple of projects. And that once we do that in a couple of weeks, the misconceptions are gone and we get a working flow pretty quickly because the rest of the team, they're already gelled. So,
And I like that point you made about, just not just being note takers as well. So I think, all those other things you went on to mention about, thinking about the services we provide and how we can help developers and what our approach to analysis might be, as well as that technical capability that you called out as well. They're all opportunities to really let the developers know that there is a broad range of things that we can do to help them. But note taking isn't the certainly isn't anywhere near the top of what we should be used for. Unless it's in the context of us taking notes on the requirements that need to be documented.
That's what Copilot's for. I don't do that anymore. Yes.
Exactly. Razelle, what's your view?
Sure. Yeah, you often talk about what are the misconceptions of BAs in the workplace and what do stakeholders in the workplace think BAs do. And you never hear this type of question, what are the misconceptions that devs have about BAs? So this really got me thinking, John, when you asked it. And I guess it's less and less experience now for me, but like Jody said, it's actually maybe with entry level devs where they think the BAs are meant to do all the thinking and they just tell me what I'm supposed to do. They give me this nice package document and I must just build something. But that's not like we've spoken now in the last 30 minutes. It's not collaboration. It's not the best way to get the most valuable product. The BAs are there to really pull people together and bring out those insights, those opinions, those smart ideas. And it takes them some time before they realize, wait, the BA would like to know my opinion. The BA does value my feedback. It's okay if I raise a question or a concern or if I question something they've said. So that probably for me is the biggest barrier to entry when it comes to collaboration. That I think is the misconception. And Jodie raised a very good point when she raised that, yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you talk about, that in some cases, I guess the worst case is the technology team, the development team might think, right, okay, BAs are here, I can sit back, let them do all the thinking, as you said, and actually most of the time that isn't appropriate, and it touches on the point Jodie made a little while ago about the technical know-how of the BA. Our role is typically not to know how to code something or how the inner workings of an application. That's really for the developers to be experts on, principally. But what we are there to do is really understand, what it is the business and the organisation need from a functional or business sense to be able to really relay that in a sensible way, in a clear way to those that are going to build the solutions. Is to make sure that we have taken into account multiple perspectives as well, so that we don't end up designing a product that works for one person in the organisation, but nobody else can use it as well. And it's often leveraging the relationships that the BAs have, so that we don't have to answer all the questions as BAs ourselves. Quite often the most effective way to respond to developers is to bring the business stakeholders along, so that the developers get to ask the questions directly. Because whilst they might have one question that we know up front, the answer might prompt many other questions, and it'd be far more efficient if the business are there to explore the answers with them. And of course, going back to the note-taking point, because in the context of us gathering requirements and further information, it is very appropriate for the business analyst to record the outcome of those conversations, however that's decided.
Yeah. Some of our favorite calls are when the business is in with the developers, because they come with a whole different aspect of what questions to ask that we as BAs get to, but we generally get to them second or third. And it can change our time frame as to how we build it and what our requirements are when the developers are in there right with the business up front, because they're asking curiosity questions that if it's my third project with this team, I'll get there, but not right up front, because I already have some of this background, and they bring a whole new perspective to these kind of conversations.
What you just said there, Joe, is what made me think about, the situation that, if we're working on as analysts a product or products that are going to have multiple components to it, we don't always know the order in which those components are going to be worked on or delivered. We might eventually do that and understand that by interaction with the technical architect or the functional architect, if there is a different one. But by being close to the developers, we get to understand what it is they're working on first. And it isn't always the thing that the business think is most important. Sometimes you need some of that infrastructure, some of the foundational pieces to be worked on before some of the items that perhaps the business is more important. So knowing that means that you can prioritize where you put your analysis, because it may be understanding the systems that are going to feed into a platform. It's understanding the data. These are all things that you can start to think about while the developers put the building blocks in place to bring these forward. I think as well. Sorry, good. Go on, Joe.
I was going to say what you just talked about also helps with the misconception that sometimes BAs are in the middle and they slow things down a little. But having the business and the developers at the same time, they understand why we're not starting on the flashy screen, but we're starting on a foundation, because they understood how the developers were thinking it through. And so sometimes that's a secondary benefit of that, is that the developers bring a different conversation to the business stakeholders when you do have them in the same calls.
That's it. I think the other thing I sometimes always hear it, but there's a perception sometimes, particularly in Agile teams, that the BA will take on the role of the project manager, or I'll be a mini PM if you like. And so I think it's always good to be quite clear up front as part of the team what you won't be doing as well as what you will. And I know sometimes the lines can get a little bit blurred, but being very clear is helpful. And sometimes, there are activities, of course, that across the team, you just have to collaboratively decide on who's best placed at any given point to take on that responsibility. So having that relationship with the developers will certainly help that. I wonder, Razelle, how does collaboration between BAs and developers, how does that differ between when we're in an agile environment versus perhaps a more traditional waterfall environment?
Yeah, so I've worked in both, and it's actually it's noticeable, the difference. What's great about Agile is that it's designed in such a way, well, it's a mindset, first of all, but it's designed in such a way that it encourages the collaboration between the two. It's iterative, it's all the time. You don't wait for a single piece of work to be in its final perfect state before you start engaging. Whereas when I worked in waterfall, you needed to know all the unknowns before it moved on to the developer. And it almost had that thinking of, I mentioned this earlier too, the siloed thinking. The BAs do all the work and they give us this finished product and the devs just build. But that whole jumping over that hurdle for collaboration was far more difficult when it came to waterfall. So for me, I've worked many years with Agile and I wouldn't go back to waterfall. There probably are scenarios and circumstances in which it works and it's good. But I think still best, for me, Agile really helps to drive collaboration and value. I probably caution with one thing though, is when you sometimes become too agile and you become too lean on your documentation, and that's actually the wrong approach. That's when you lean into fragile agile, as they say. So, Agile is not meant to throw out the documentation. It's meant to keep it lean and necessary, and like using Copilot will help you do that, but it's not meant to get rid of it. It's not heavy. It's keeping it lean, but it's not documentless.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, for any BAs out there thinking that Agile means no documentation, you've heard it here first. Hopefully you hear it many times. That is absolutely not the case. Jodie, what's your view on that same point around collaboration differing between Agile and waterfall?
Well, I'll second, third, fourth. The Agile does not mean no documentation. That only works until somebody leaves, and then you're stuck. So it's super good there. We still do a lot of documents, especially for the collaboration of Agile, on the Agile, and you start it so that you can have how do things work now? What are the pictures? What is the flow? So we have more short form BRDs, because some of it you have to know before you start. And the easiest way to share it is a wiki or a document. And you need to know what your scope, in scope, out of scope, and what some of your clear guidelines are before you start Agile. Because it may not be waterfall, but there are things that are definitely not on the table. But on the waterfall side, we still use it a little bit. And our team does both full custom code and integration type code with implementations. When we're talking an implementation, it truly is almost a waterfall kind of thing. You're implementing a third party. There are not a lot of guesses. It's put it all up front, somebody goes. It is more waterfall. But we still need the full collaboration to make sure that we're not hitting adjacent problems. And they are problems at the point if we hit them without knowing. And so we want to make sure that we take care of that first. We're really intentional then when we're doing more of the waterfall that says, where are we going? How far are we going to get? Because we could have outside contractors building for us, and they need to know where to stop and where the gates are. And so we're very clear when we start there. I'm with you though. If I could live in Agile where all day long, I will stay there, because it's more of a interactive development environment. It's not you've got the whole front end and the dev goes away and then they come back, and it's more interactive. It allows you to work with the teams and work with the developers, which is a great place to be.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think as someone that has been in both waterfall projects and then Agile, and then gone back to waterfall projects before going to Agile, backwards and forwards, basically, you tend to like recognize some of the patterns that occur in Agile that I guess I wouldn't want to. Maybe traditionally there's a perception that there's certain things are done in a certain way in waterfall, such as that you almost document and you throw it over to developers, as it were. That you're somewhat hands off and it's over to them for the next stage. Whereas, I think having been involved in Agile projects where that isn't the case, you realise that probably, whilst some of the formal documentation from a waterfall sense, in terms of formal sign off of the documentation before officially being linked with other development items might occur, the reality is that there's lots of collaboration that needs to happen in the waterfall project as well, between the development team and the BA, to the point that actually most of the time I think a really well functioning waterfall project, the developers probably have a good view of what's coming down the line formally before it arrives, or perhaps that the waterfall project is not this behemoth; it's more broken down to maybe smaller manageable chunks of waterfall. But there are, of course, certain times within Agile, as you said, I think, Jodie, that as the BA, you need to spend a little bit of time thinking about what the requirement is, where the data comes from, how you need it organised. You can't always just think on the fly. So it's important sometimes to give the BAs the right time up front to think about something and to document it and get their thoughts together. But that shouldn't always, it shouldn't really just hold the developers up, of course. So yes, I think a lot of what we see in Agile around the continuous collaboration, the evolution of requirements and artifacts, being closely part of the team and bringing stakeholders in front of the development team, all of that can really be done if you find yourself in a waterfall environment. You just have to be a bit more deliberate about it, I think. But I definitely agree. If you're in an Agile environment, all of those things we've just spoken about are very front and center, very obvious. They're almost there out of the box, as it were, in most teams. So that's helpful. I wonder, Jodie, how do you prevent misunderstandings between business stakeholders and development teams?
How do you try to prevent misunderstandings?
Sorry.
They will be there, and then you handle them effectively. A lot of it is translating, ensuring everybody is truly understanding what the other person is saying, whether it's, let me rephrase that. Did I understand you correctly? Document this out with a quick flow chart. Does this match what you're trying to say? Going back to being very quick to throw a picture on the board, whatever that might be, to make sure that what one person is saying is exactly what the other person is hearing. And moving at a speed that we talked earlier that allows people to digest a little bit, because everybody thinks and processes differently. So kind of pause back, repeating it gives somebody a chance to rethink what they were thinking to make sure that they understood it. And some of the other things that may or may not be, it's the standard way of doing this, is making sure that we cover expectations, because perception is more, it has more to do with perception than reality. And so we want to ensure that people perceive what we're doing is where we really are. Showing a lot of different examples, sharing mock-ups, and not sharing release dates too early. Because you're in Agile, you can guess where we're going to be, but we don't know that. We can get to a quarter and then down to a month and then maybe down to a week. But I'm try really hard here not to set expectations that we can't meet, because then things start getting corners cut, or they're changing, or there's a scope change and we can't correct that. And then there's misunderstandings between the dev and the business, or between the BA in the middle of that. And we're trying to handle the communications on things that could have been prevented and avoidable.
Agreed. Agreed. Yeah. Razelle?
Yeah, I think if you really want to prevent misunderstandings between business stakeholders and devs, is the first thing you must do is hire a BA, because they bridge the gap. Yeah, no, Jodie made some really good points about the whole active listening, really try to put it into your own words to see if you understood what the business stakeholders are saying. And same with the devs. You've got to be able to speak the language of the business and speak the language of the devs. And then you've got to be that translator. That's how it works for me. I have to translate what business is saying to me, to the devs, so that they can understand it in their language. But we all speak in English, don't worry. We all speak in the same language. But I think it's the BA understanding that they play that role, and they really have to bridge that gap if you want to reduce misunderstandings, and also the feedback loop. If you get it wrong, you make a mistake, you learn from it, you adapt, you improve for the next time. Always be open to those feedback loops.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean that the points that were made earlier on around avoiding jargon and acronyms where you can, it's definitely helpful in ensuring there is a shared language. I think sometimes as well, if there's a bigger business analysis team, making sure that we're describing things in a fairly consistent, similar way to each other is useful, particularly as well if process might be part of what we're producing as well. Having wildly different looking processes or artifacts between different team members, even though they're BAs, can cause a little bit of, I guess, discomfort amongst maybe the developers if they're seeing wildly different standards of inputs from different members of the team. So I think we can try and equalise that where possible by upskilling some of our BAs if we need to, but also making sure that some of the more technical BAs don't go too technical without bringing the rest of the team and the stakeholders along. I think beyond all of that, I think just prioritising clarity over huge documentation should always be key, and making sure that what is delivered is understood before we go on to produce more and more content volume. And for me as well, I mean, that touches as well on the point that as BAs, we're not there to generate pages unnecessarily. So as concise as we can make our analysis and as easy to understand, the better, so that our developers and our other colleagues don't have to trawl through text, loads of pages to try and figure out what we mean. I think I feel like they're probably the main points. But you've both mentioned about being the translator and being the bridge between the business is the number one tip, as Razelle put it. I couldn't agree.
Yes.
So, as we draw towards the close, I just one further question, Kid, in terms of your number one tip for working effectively with developers, if you haven't, that you might not have shared already. And Razelle, I'll ask you that, please.
Yeah, so if I boil it down to the number one tip, for me, I would say it's courageous engagement. You as the BA, you need to know how to pull in your dev to extract those valuable insights. But at the same time, while you're working with them, be courageous enough to say something did not work well in the last sprint or in the last time we implemented. What can we do better? Or I'm sensing there's something going on in the background, and maybe your focus is dwindling a little bit. How can I help? What can we do? Try to empathize, be able to have these courageous conversations. And don't look at them as, oh, they're this conflict type scenarios I need to run away from, but rather lean into them, because these will actually help build effective collaboration. It will actually help you to better communicate with your devs in the long term. So the words I would leave is courageous engagement.
Excellent. Yeah. Yeah. Excellent points there, mate. Razelle, thank you. And Jodie.
It's one of the tougher questions. I think it comes down to mutual respect in the collaboration and being able to take high points and collaborate on people's achievements as part of your team and elevate the whole team during this. Because if you can get to the point of respecting what each other does and sharing the highlights, and the elevation of the team just brings more collaboration inherent to the team.
Yeah.
And it's just a different way of doing it, as opposed to focusing on the actual methods and process behind it. Is the shared experiences.
Yeah, and that to recognise as well the skills that and experience that each member of the team brings can really be important, and particularly as should happen all the time, ideally, that particularly as we leverage that experience and those skills as well. So if someone is particularly expert perhaps in user experience, let's leverage that, bring that together. Likewise, if there's someone who's an expert facilitator or has worked on the product before, let's get them in, get them involved, so they can bring a little bit more colour perhaps to the situation that might otherwise be there. I think for me, that my number one tip is to engage early with the developers, to find out as you do that, what not only what they expect from you, but actually find out from them what they've had in the past that has not worked, or what they've found to have in the past from BAs that has caused them issues. Now, for me, that is like gold dust, that insight, because if you get that information, it just gives you such an advantage when you're trying to deliver valuable requirements. The flaw, however, that some people have is that they ask those questions, but they don't act on it. And I think if you're going to ask the question to developers, if you don't act on it, for me, it probably makes the situation worse than if you never asked in the first place.
True, very true.
But and otherwise, I mean, maybe another tip as well that I should recognise is that for anyone out there that doesn't know, hasn't worked with developers, they're all human beings, all really nice people. In my experience, normally approachable. You help them, they'll help you. There's loads to learn from them as well. And I think the more you get closer to developers as a business analyst, you'll be more effective. You'll probably enjoy your role a bit more. You'll make some good friends, I'm sure, as well. And your analysis will be better thought of, not just by the developers, but by everybody, I expect. So feels like it should have a call to arms to go and hug a developer at this point, but maybe don't go that far. But
we may not like that.
Close enough that you could. Anyway, there we go. But on that visual note, maybe we'll call it to a halt there for the conversation. But really appreciate, Razelle, Jodie, your insight on what for me is really interesting and really important topic. All BAs should really embrace that collaboration and really, really get as expert as they can be in it. So yeah, all that remains is me to thank you for your time and your insight. And I'll of course look forward to the next time that we speak.
Great. Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, everybody.